So I really believe that programming is for humans more than for machines. But I don't think developers today are just writing code. A lot of the time, developers are developing in their minds. They're thinking of ways to solve a problem, to design a solution, right? And I would like to say I'm one of the examples where you put your mind to it. It's just a matter of it not taking no for an answer.
Hey, I'm Al, and this is the Paglalayag podcast. I'm using this podcast to showcase what's going on around me in the hardware and cleantech sectors dito sa Philippines. With guests from across the startup, research, investment, and enabler ecosystems, Paglalayag focuses on the stories and inspirations that motivate us to start up in hardware and press on down this arduous path of steering our economy away from the looming climate catastrophe that makes itself increasingly felt in our lives each passing year. I hope you'll find this cast of characters as impressive and inspiring as I do. Also, if you've been listening to these podcasts and want to let me know what you think, there's a survey form available at paglalayag.net-podcast. You can also reach out by email at al@paglalayag.net. I'd love to hear from you. Sige, tuloy-tuloy lang. Let's jump in. Software consultant alongside a senior engineer with Microsoft, who's worked across many different large software systems for a number of companies, starting at Friendster. Friendster is kind of the first well-known company, and working on the graph networking technology that they used. And then from there, a couple years of consulting with the smart companies, and then moving into Google for 10 years in Australia before his current role with Microsoft. But alongside that, Dean has put a number of articles together on software design and software engineering and the different practices involved. And that series is called Modern Software Engineering, which is what we're going to chat about today. So we're looking forward to sponging off of Dean's experience with this. And yeah, thank you very much for joining me today.
It is my pleasure, Al. Thank you for that intro.
You bet. So as far as Paglalaya goes, we have a lot of people who are building businesses who are kind of straddling business and technology development. Sometimes it's more in hardware. And of course, with the BSU, I work with a lot of students and people who are very early career as well. So we'll go through this, but we'll try and keep it at a pretty high level, and where we need to, we can get a little bit into the details, but try to keep it at a not too much technical with what we're
Yeah,
talking about. Yeah.
sounds great.
But let's just hear a little bit more about your experience and your journey to that got you to where you are today. So and Friendster is where I'd like to start. I hadn't really looked into the company before preparing this episode, but I was surprised to learn that the Philippines was actually quite a big part of their traffic when they were like really quite a big company for their time.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what it was like to be like in a company like that when it was like kind of high flying.
Yeah, it's a very interesting experience. It started so I was employee number 11 in the Philippines, something like that. And by the time I left, we were around 100 something. And it was like 3 years. In 3 years, we went from 11 to 100 something, and that was nuts. It's
And how many
hard to
users?
explain. The users when I joined was around 60 million, 70 million. And then by the
Right.
time I left, it was 100, 110 million. So doubled in that amount of time, essentially.
Yeah, I
Um,
heard some I mean this is like really like onboarding into what some people would call web 2. Like I was seeing some
yes.
stories about how they were like they talk about growth hacking right now. Like they were
Hmm.
talking about some like anti-growth hacking strategies to try to slow down the amount of people signing up every day because it was like that kind of viral.
Yes. Um, and there are a lot of interesting technical challenges because of that.
Yeah.
Uh, and if you were exposed to this a while back, Friendster kind of allowed people to customize their web page, like their pages, their profiles. And then there was a small industry of folks that kind of hacked the JavaScript around so that they could make their pages look, the profile pages look very interesting and have functionality that was not intended. So there were a lot of people that were doing interesting things as users of Friendster. And yeah, it was from behind the scenes. It's always fun seeing what people are getting away with, and then the team scrambling to plug holes and supporting multiple browsers was an interesting challenge. I am so thankful I never had to deal with that myself.
You're not the front
I
end.
stayed. Yeah, I'm not in the front end, so I'm so happy I stayed in the back end. Um, but yeah, like that time, you had to support Internet Explorer, multiple versions of Internet Explorer, and then Firefox was new, Mozilla was a thing, Opera was another. So those are yeah, those were fun times.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you have a part in your book that you called your bet the career moment.
Yes.
Like how far into your like how far into your career were you at that point? And tell us about what that was and like what was going through your head when you went through that.
Yeah, so I was fairly new to the company, and I was working with this person that was supposed to be the senior engineer that was crafting the plan and then guiding. Except the decisions we were making were not in line with modern approaches. And so at some point, I had to chat with the VP that hired me, and I said, "Look, let me get this a go. The project's already late. We're already over budget, and you're like the way we're trying to approach this isn't working. Let me back myself. Like, give me a certain amount of time, and let me get from zero to functional as fast as I can." I think if I remember this story correctly, it was give me a month and let's see how far I can get. And based on that, we can determine whether or not we can continue with the path we were taking or this new approach. Thankfully, it worked because that hadn't worked, I don't think my career would have turned out the way it did because that was the situation where it's like I'm fairly new to the company. Like I wasn't even months in. It's like 3 months in, and I was already like, no, this isn't working. So I was like, I'm not even past the traditional probation period, right? Like there's this probation period of like 6 months. So if I mess up, that would have been it. And I'm pretty sure my career would have turned out very different if I didn't back myself there. So what my proposal was, let's do a rewrite instead. Let's work our way back from what the requirements are of the existing system instead of trying to retrofit what you already have. So what they already had was leaking memory, there were concurrency bugs, there was like all sorts of issues which served them for a while, but at the scale they were at and at the scale they were growing, there were some glaring problems that needed to be
Yeah, it was
addressed.
just cracking under the pressure, like it,
Yeah, almost literally. So
because
yeah,
you can't just like reset a service the way you can today. With
yeah, no.
were you running your own servers? Like were you
Yes,
deploying
that was the other thing.
premises or
Yeah,
yeah,
Friendster was running on premises, so they had space at a data center, and they had servers that they were running, a full ops team 24/7. And then if there were issues with the hardware, someone had to drive up to the to the DC, like the data center, and then push buttons to restart or pull out hard drives and things like that. So this is way, way before. It was around 2005. So 2007 was when I joined them. So think about that time. There was no cloud computing yet. Like
Yeah.
cloud
Yeah, yeah.
computing was literally a cloud in a diagram. That was so
Yeah, well, I like
yeah,
even like things like Heroku were probably 4 or 5 years away by that.
super. Yeah, they were incubating at that time. So there was Joyent, but Joyent had like was not a very popular approach. So they were trying to sell hosting. Um, they were ahead of the game, but yeah, it wasn't until Amazon got in there and said, "All right, we're gonna start selling storage. We're gonna call it by an API, and then oh, by the way, we can sell you servers." So yeah,
And this system was the graph network itself, or was that particular moment a different part?
yeah. So everything was running on servers that Friendster owned and operated. So even the front end code was hosted on those servers, and so internet traffic was going to it. The graph server in particular was the system I was working with, and that graph server was written in C++, and it was running on bare metal machines to leverage as much of the CPU, the memory,
Yeah.
for performance reasons, because it was handling like thousands and thousands of requests per second. Like the amount of traffic it's handling from all the front end servers making requests to the back end was at that time is pretty serious scale.
And this would be how the app is keeping track of who's friends with who and who's making
Yes.
connections with each other, which
Uh-huh.
was like a data pattern that had never been really
Uh-huh.
developed
Yes.
before. Like it was kind of being developed for the first time with that particular company and type of application.
Yeah. So the interesting part isn't just who your friends were. So if you were looking at someone else's profile, for example, Friendster would give you alternate connections. So if you're not friends, it would show you who you had in common or how you would reach this person. So even up to 2 degrees. So we'd say, all
Like
right,
a recommendations sort of situation.
yeah. So like how would you like Kevin Bacon, like degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? How far are you from Kevin Bacon or something, whatever that is. But yeah, like you look at anybody's profile, not necessarily just friends' profiles. It was all right, this friend of a friend. Who are the people in between us? And almost every view, you need to serve that and compute that because the graph would have changed in between. So those were in like computationally. So if you had a computer science background, you know that that kind of computation is non-trivial. And if you had to do it on the fly, that was a novel problem back then. And it still is. And so now the kind of the solution nowadays is you pre-compute some of that and then you cache that somewhere so you don't have to keep computing it all the time. But remember, this was 2007, and we kind of didn't have any of that. We had to build it ourselves.
Yeah.
So that was the interesting challenge there.
And the multi-threading is something that you already had experience with? Like, had you been doing that
Yes,
in past stuff? Because that's quite a tricky part of programming to
indeed.
track of and to do safely and like with the memory like you're talking about and stuff.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So before that, I was doing work with some of these content providers. It's a whole industry in the Philippines where you have services via SMS, right?
Mm,
And one of those was this company that did uh, text to mail, so email to text, and the other way around.
okay.
So this was very popular with folks that had uh, contacts in other countries that they wanted to have almost real-time conversation with. So you receive a text message here, and you reply via text, and it would send an email, and then the other
Mm,
person can respond to the email, and then you would receive it as a text message. So that was fun. And then part of that was to also handle the scale. And to do that, we needed to make use of a server more. That's where I learned a lot of the networking patterns and the concurrency patterns I had to read so many books and then try it out myself and figure out, like from fundamentals, from the ground up, get to a point where what is this concurrency and bring myself up to a point of building that vocabulary. And then by the time I joined Friendster, I already have enough experience in uh, practical knowledge, skills to be able to solve problems of that sort. So it was kind of a
That's
confluence
great.
moment. Yeah, yeah. It's like I was prepped. I was ready for
Yeah.
that moment to take on a challenge like that. Uh,
Cool. And
yeah.
then getting into Google and Microsoft, it was similar systems or getting into other parts of
Oh,
the
yeah.
application.
So my personal, and I think I mentioned this in the book as well, is my personal area of interest really is performance engineering. So it's a special kind of software engineering where your focus is on measurement and improvement or management of the performance of a system. So you can measure performance a couple of ways. You can do it through throughput, it's like how many things you can handle per unit time, or like how fast you're doing a certain thing. So maybe you're doing one thing and you want to do that one thing really quickly. So think about a race, like an F1 race. Yeah, like the higher performance your car is, the quicker you can get around the track. But if you're thinking about shipping containers, you want to be efficient. So you want to move as much cargo in as little amount of like fuel or
Space you.
time.
Yeah. And yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of software engineering is my first it was an area of interest and it became slowly over time like a domain that I have had a lot of exposure in. And while you can't really master that, it's more like enough familiarity that you can apply it in many ways.
Right.
So when I moved into Google, I was doing different kinds of performance engineering in the organizations that I was part of. And the good thing about organizations like Google, Microsoft is you can find these problems where you can apply your strengths and that the organizational structure usually allows for that to be supported and allow you to thrive. So at Google, one of the things am that I can talk about this public is some work I did with the LLVM project. So LLVM is the compiler framework. So if you wanted to create your own language, or if you wanted to use a compiler that isn't GCC, for example, for C++, there's the Clang compiler. And I have code in that project that I contributed as open source while I was at Google. And so it gets a little bit meta because the tool that I contributed was for function call tracing. So for example, in C++, you have a function calling a function, calling a function, whatever, right? And you wanted to measure the time each function took. So it's latency. You're trying to measure duration or latency between start and end. To do that in C++, you either have to write timing code yourself, which is very tedious, or you're going to use macros and it makes your code very ugly. Or you can hack a compiler to put the instrumentation points in the entrance and exit points of the function. And then you would put like some sort of runtime so you can enable and disable tracing without pausing the program. Because let's say you're trying to debug or the performance of a running server that had many threads.
Right.
You don't want to stop it just to measure performance. So that's one of the contributions I make, and that's open source. Um, and then we use that tool in Google to figure out why stuff is slow. So make the tool open and then use that tool to then do more performance engineering. And then another thing I did at Google was measurement of Chrome's performance. So there's a lab that would build Chrome and then run benchmarks via Chrome and then use statistics and math to figure out, all right, based on how the shape of this time series looks, it's likely that the performance change between this commit and this other commit. So imagine a Git history, right? So now that you kind of identify a
And
potential,
trace it, you can kind of identify where it started coming from, and then it helps
yes,
narrow down on where the code.
exactly. So
So
we
your
then
tracing is
also,
not so much, you're not tracing the function calls per se. You're tracing like the like are you tracing function calls, or are
no,
you
for Chrome, no, that's too expensive. So for Chrome,
okay?
it's like macro benchmarks. So like here's a JavaScript benchmark. It will produce some numbers, and then it would send it to some back end that recorded those numbers as a time series over time. And then
Hmm.
we did analysis on the time series. And what's more interesting isn't just the anomaly detection. Once we found a range of potential difference, then we automated the culprit finding. So we would create builds of Chrome in between those two commits and then run the benchmarks and then do statistical analysis to say, all right, this is the most likely culprit. So
I like that you're talking about commits. I haven't gotten into this aspect with any podcast guests yet, but I'm going to be giving a Git tutorial to a number of engineers tomorrow. So I'm going to see if
nice.
I can pull some little nuggets out of this.
Yeah, because like one thing that helps, I can tell you right away, is like smaller commits, better. I'm just gonna tell you right away,
Yeah,
smaller
yeah,
commits, better. Because yeah.
yeah. You can really you like. I mean, it just becomes very unambiguous if you can
Mhm.
trace it down to a single commit. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so then like because you're like this you're talking about actually the code base of Chrome itself, like the browser Chrome.
Yeah. hmm Yep.
So you could spin that up on all sorts of individual devices and run individual commits and throw
Yep.
same traffic or function calls or whatever at it and
hmm
get hotspots very easily compared to like web services and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that spins up very easily, relatively speaking, compared to
hmm
like if you're going to try and do that with your graph server, it would be a lot harder to synthesize that kind of traffic.
Right.
Um,
So funny you say that. There was a team at Friendster that specialized precisely on what you were describing. So there was a performance, stability, and reliability team. And I always liked the folks in that team because they told me when I broke the server, when I made it slower, right? So they all like that's when I got exposed to it. I didn't know that I really wanted to do that until I worked with people that did that.
right.
And I'm like, oh, that is cool. And then I started leaning more and more into that side of it, the deeper I got in my career. So I do that at Microsoft as well, except not at the micro level anymore. So because I'm a principal software engineer, I'm more across strategic efforts. So I'm looking at longer term efforts. How can
Got
we
lines,
improve?
like
Yeah,
big
design.
ones to develop and stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Yeah, it's funny. Like, I mean, I started in engineering and then switched over to science. And this, I'm gonna pull up something that you said in your documentation
Sure.
part. And most our engineers aren't artists, and that like so the whole thing about writing and being able to explain to other people how your software is supposed to work or the particular module that you wrote or even that you're working with is something that engineers is maybe not the strongest part of an engineering education curriculum. So a lot of engineers will come out of school not as strong in that aspect as they could be. Um,
Right.
and like when I deal with developers, especially like with Ruby on Rails, it's not the most strict. It's like it's quite a loose culture and like way of developing things. And so I've dealt with developers a number of times who don't like writing tests and things like that. But like with my imagination, when I like imagining, okay, one of these days I'm gonna have this big grand app that's gonna be like doing all this traffic. How can I like anticipate that and like generate synthetic traffic for it and stuff like that? And when I start talking to the developers like that, they just like look at me like I'm crazy and like just like there's it's like not where their heads at. They want to be writing features and things like that.
Right.
It's a very different way of it's a very different headspace. It's a very different way of approaching problems that if you're always working for small teams, you're never going to have that exposure to a lot
Yes.
of traffic. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And just to add to that, it sometimes and a lot of the times it isn't because folks don't want to do it. It's that they haven't seen the value of doing it. And what I've seen personally when I work with folks that did Ruby on Rails as well, and they wrote really beautiful code. Like I don't do Ruby myself. I can kind of read it, but when I read the code they write, and it's so elegant, and they have more descriptive names, and they have comments like that are longer than the actual like 2 3 lines that did the thing. And then they would have like multiple like hundreds of lines of back then they were using Cucumber or RSpec, like these like higher level testing,
behavior development, domain
BDD, right? Behavior.
kind of things.
Exactly. And so they would start with the test and then they would implement the feature and then they would keep running the test as they saved it. And so that when I saw that firsthand, it's like, man, more people should be doing this. And
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to say in the part of the book where I mentioned test-driven development. It's like I have seen this firsthand, where if you start with what the requirements are and express it as something you can execute, as opposed to like read and then try and figure out and manually do, it changes the way you look at software engineering. And it becomes more manageable as you add more features or more requirements. And as you build your app from like the simple thing into something that becomes more complex, then you can use the investment you've had in the tests to make sure you haven't broken anything as you add more. So yeah, I'm totally with you. It's a thing.
Yeah. I always like to show people the test suite running through as an example of how that can work. Yeah. And they the for me I kind of like feel naked coding without it, but at the same time I don't move as fast as a lot of other people do. But like I've walked away from features that I wrote 5 years ago. And I mean, of course, I don't remember how that works anymore.
Yes.
If I need to change something, then I just go in there and start tweaking stuff, seeing tests that break, and then I know, and then like I have everything I need. I
Yeah.
don't need to spend that much time analyzing.
Yeah. And the one thing that I also mentioned in the book is like when you write the documentation or the test, it's not necessarily for someone else, because that someone else could be you like 2 weeks from now because you might have already forgotten what you were thinking. So if you didn't write it down, you'd be like, who wrote this code? And then you look at the history, it's like, oh, I did. It's like, what was I thinking? Right? So it is like an insurance policy. Like you pay it down, it's like an investment for the future.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and I mean, leading in that kind of leads into my next question, because there are these different kind of waves you talked about, like TDD. We just talked about DevOps is another one. You talked about, I mean, because you've been through a number of like kind of trends or like
Mhm.
engineering movements that became popular, and then perhaps they made like a very good contribution, but people have sort of moved on from them. And it's not the big deal anymore that it was once upon
Yeah.
a time. And DevOps is one you mentioned. We just talked about test-driven development. How do you see that kind of playing out with this current wave? Like, there's a lot of AI code
Mhm.
generation tools and stuff like that that's going. Like, what have you observed, and where do you th see things going at the moment?
So what I've observed is AI is a game changer. There's no two ways around it. And it's a game changer in the same way that the personal computer was a game changer. It shifted the productivity to a different gear. So imagine doing spreadsheets without an actual spreadsheet program. You can't. Like paper, pencil, and then a slide rule and whatever, like forget it. Right? But that's what people used to do. And people used to specialize in actually doing these things.
Yeah, and they were able
Imagine,
to put on the moon with that.
yeah, right? And think about logarithm tables and calculators, like human calculators. Amazing. But you wouldn't do that anymore today because computers can run circles around people. And the people that were computers, they were called computers, humans. They
Either
then
computes this.
eventually, yeah. So like then now, instead of them doing the computing themselves, they learn to use a digital computer to do the computing, but they had to program it. So now we have this amazing tool with AI to enable programmers, software engineers, designers, artists come up with content way faster than if you're just doing it by hand. And once you get a taste of that, it's like, well, we should be using this. Now, will it replace people? Is one of the questions, right? It depends on what the people were doing in the first place. If it's just manually writing code, I think yes. But I don't think developers today are just writing code. A lot of the time, developers are developing in their minds. They're thinking of ways to solve a problem, to design a solution, right? Now, if you combine that thinking power with a, an assistant that can make the changes for you really quickly, then that's strictly a productivity improvement. So now, if you had 100 people that were doing programming, does that mean you then fire 80 of them and just let 20 of them do the work of the 100? Every every trend I've seen so far isn't going that way. It's doing 5 times more instead of firing the 80 to do the same amount that the 100 would do, right? So instead
Yeah,
of
get
removing
more
the
done.
80%, you
Get
just
more done.
multiply your the power of your team. And so any organization that's saying no AI because something is kind of losing the race, if you think about it in those terms. Um, Now, it might be that some companies learn that they really didn't need 100, and that would be unfortunate, right?
Yeah, and this is kind of intersecting with a big hiring boom that happened, and so there's a certain
Yeah,
amount of that kind of like people ratcheting back just because there was just like a really big hiring boom for a time that
yeah.
um yeah.
So there's bound to be some correction, but then think about the productivity increase and how what that would mean to the industry and to like humanity in general. And I think because software, quote unquote, has been eating the earth, right? Then it just means we end up with more software. Whether or not it's better software is a matter of taste, and better in terms of what. That's where I think humans are still the judge of that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I mean, for the most part, people are trying to solve a problem that presumably people want to solve,
Hmm.
and so uh like you hear a lot of people talk about they'll try the AI tools for a while and it speeds them up, which is great, but then they start forgetting how to do things. and then they start going along with suggestions from the AI that were not particularly good suggestions, and then compounding things where they have to go back and do a bunch of reworking, which ends up being its own time that needs to be spent.
Cost.
So
Yes.
then, at what point are you actually moving faster versus getting led down a garden path
Yeah.
that you shouldn't be
And
going
that's
down?
where and that's where there's no replacement for the skills required, right? Human ingenuity and knowledge. Like you need to be able to judge whether what the AI created is good or bad. Like if you asked it to implement a breadth first search and it implemented depth first search, you need to be able to tell the difference. Otherwise, it's you just got something that's wrong, right?
Yeah.
And that's why humans will still be required because language is imperfect and then these systems are imperfect. And so you're going to end up with checks and balances that will still be required no matter how good these systems get.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned like you're kind of starting to like you did some consulting before, so it's not your first time, but now that you're getting
Yeah.
back into like a bit of business for yourself, not
Mhm.
100%, but what are some of the challenges that you face? And like what would you say is like the biggest like difference, like doing your own thing versus being like a part of a very large group?
Yes. So, first of all, business is sales and marketing. And if you're not doing it or not doing it well, that affects your revenue 100%. Like whatever effort you put into building your product or improving your service isn't nearly as impactful as actually doing sales and marketing. So let's say you have a great product, right? But you don't invest in any sales or marketing. How do you get it to people's hands? And that's the huge difference. When you don't have your own marketing department, like, or you don't have other people who specialize in that doing it, and you have to do
Falls
it
on you.
yourself. Exactly. So it's the effort you put in will determine how high your ceiling is. And so if you're doing it part time, you have to be really like very judicious about how you use the time and the resources. It's like, do you have a budget for sales and marketing, or you only have this much time? How are you going to use that time to get the results that you want? And then on top of delivering the service yourself or selling a product yourself as well. So figuring out that trade, and you start getting into things like opportunity cost. Like every hour I'm doing this, I'm not doing something else, right? Like what is that trade I'm making, and is it worth it? So yeah,
Yeah, fair enough. And you mentioned that you did some of this profiling open source. Have you been like I mean, how many different open source projects have you been involved with over your career, say?
yeah, that's a good question. There's at least two that are well known.
Okay.
One is the LLVM project, which is the compiler framework. The other one is the Boost C++ libraries. That was way back in the 2010s. And uh, yeah, those are the two big ones that I've contributed to. I also have a C++ networking library, but that's been dormant for since I moved to Australia. Say, I think the last major thing I did was around 2014, 2015 with that. So that's like a decade ago. Um, but in those cases, it's been collaborating. It's the same collaborating in any open source project, and part of it is communication skills, written and verbal communication skills. The more you can develop that, I think the better it is you're gonna have a time, because technical skills can only get you so far. It's the how you relate to people and how you listen to them and how you get your point across effectively that really makes a difference.
Yeah. I if it really helps to for people to appreciate what the project's trying to accomplish, especially when a lot of it is like you're putting effort into something, and like I mean, if it's a mature project, then people understand the value already.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of it depends on how mature it is, but then you can only imagine what people when they first were getting started with it when it was just like an idea or a small code base.
Hmm.
Um, in my podcast with Jay Fajardo, he mentioned I mean he was very much encouraging Filipinos to embrace the open source. It's maybe not as popular as it was maybe 10 years ago, or in some ways the industry's changed, but maybe it goes up and down. We'll see how it plays out. But he said that he wasn't he like there weren't any projects off the top of in mind that were like a kind of a Filipino project that open source and has had the staying power in that. Do you have any on mind that would be good candidates or you describe like that?
I mean, if somebody in the audience wants to take CPP Netlib, the library that I made open source, and run with it, then that would be one. But nah, it's like kidding aside, I don't. There used to be this group that created a router, like oh sorry, a bridge that can do packet filtering at layer two instead of layer three, which is when I saw it, it was mind blowing. It's like, oh, it's transparent on the network. So you put it in between the like switches and the router, and then you can do the packet filtering and all of that. I think it was called the Anino project. That was way, way back, like early 2000s. Even before I joined Friendster, that was a thing. I don't remember if they made it open source. It was made by a group of very enthusiastic, they call themselves hackers. So I'll respect that. But yeah, the Anino project, like when I saw that, it was amazing. And I don't remember if they made it open source, but I thought there's certainly a lot of talent in the Philippines. And when we and I would like to say I'm one of the examples where you put your mind to it. It's just a matter of not taking no for an answer and putting yourself out there and just saying, you know what? I'm just like everybody else. We're gonna learn. We're gonna put the time in. We're not gonna get intimidated by people that have degrees from different places. I mean, I don't even have a degree, and I'm in Microsoft, and I was at Google. So, like, don't let that stop you, really.
Right.
If you put your mind to it, just give it a go.
And so how would you describe your coaching program?
Right. Yes. So thank you. That's a good segue. So a lot of the work I do, both at Google and at Microsoft, was mentoring. And so I was doing mentoring in my official capacity as a software engineer at Google and at Microsoft. I get to do that now outside for people that are not in Microsoft. And I don't do it full time, but it's a matter of people that want to level up in terms of their software engineering career, their skills development, their interpersonal communication, planning is a big thing, and execution. So the coaching slash mentoring program is really for people that are looking to get better in what they do as software engineers, whether it's trying to craft your career, getting promoted, or learning specific skills and learning to learn in particular. So that's been going on now for since I started in December. There's now 5 people that are in that process in that program, and it so far it's been going well. And I'm open for a few more. There's still time in the day that I can do coaching, and so if you're interested, reach out.
I have a feeling you'll be having some reach outs from BSU at some point, but we'll see
Cool.
how that plays out. Um,
I'm looking forward to it.
yeah, yeah. So then I always like to finish off with a couple quotes. So I've got a couple
Yes.
programming quotes.
Uh-huh.
You might recognize the first one, Martin Fowler.
Yeah.
Um, his was any fool can write code that a computer can understand, but good programmers write code that humans can understand. And then the second one, I actually don't know this fellow, but I guess he's out of the JavaScript world. And he says that code is like humor. When you have to explain it, it's bad. It's great.
That's funny. That one is funny. But the first one is more it resonates more with me because I take software programming in particular, like using a programming language. I treat it as using an actual human language because otherwise you'd be writing machine code. And if you've ever had to do that, you know that is not the way to do it. And if you've ever had to write assembly, that's like just a half step above, but it's like reading hieroglyphics. It's not for humans. It's still for machines. And one of the points I make in the book is that writing documentation is also the same skills you need to write good code. And that is because the audience is a human. And that human could be yourself like 6 hours from now or 6 months from now. Or it could be someone else in a team. And it's more important that other people understand the code rather than the computer understanding it. Because we can always make compilers and runtimes better and more efficient. It's harder to make other people better and more efficient. So programming to the person or to the people, to the team, while we can hope people can get better, or while we can hope that everyone will be really good at reading or writing, there's only so much we could do. And the easier we make our code more readable, the better it is for everyone involved. So I really believe that programming is for humans more than for machines, despite what the LLMs think about it. So
Yeah, well, the LLMs, that's a whole other thing when you start getting into like how do they understand what they're reading when there's these things that come from all these different times. And you mentioned that there have been times when you've had to basically alert a code-based maintainer that the documentation they've written is no longer valid.
yes.
It needs to be
Uh-huh.
replaced.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes that happens, and yeah,
Hmm.
so that having that level of judgment to be able to go in and see and actually these things don't even match, like what the documentation say isn't what the code is
Yeah.
doing is I think it might be a while before the bots pick up on those
Can
sorts
figure
of
that out. Yeah.
that happen. Yeah, especially
I'd like
when
to see it happen. Like, to be honest with you, I would like to see that happen because it would cut down the amount of time in code review that humans actually spend. So
it would be
uh,
amazing. Although I wonder to what extent, because you've got so many people. Well, I mean, I hear stories anyway of people taking what the LLM wrote and then just copying and pasting it in, not really knowing what it's doing in the first place. Like the craziest one was the guy who was doing it for legal cases. I
right,
think he
yeah.
for that one, but yeah, if you're basically just accepting what the bot wrote, then that would seem to suggest that the documentation is not keeping track, or vice versa. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. Well, very very nice, and I look forward to more conversations going forward. But I think we'll wrap up with Paglalayag here. I will say that Dean has been nice enough to extend some books to the audience of Paglalayag. So if you're interested in it, then shoot me a message at al@paglalayag.net, and we'll kick you a copy over. And yeah, there's Dean's got lots to share when it comes to building big, solid performance systems. So if that's where you'd like to be going with your company or your software project or your career, then yeah, he's got all sorts of resources to bring. So cheers, thanks a lot for joining me. Tulay tulay lang.
Uh, Thanks, Al.